big question which is on my mind, and I think is on quite a lot of people's minds right now. Is it possible for Christianity and Islam to coexist?
Islam and Christianity cannot coexist if by coexist you mean as equal citizens. I can go to the Muslim world and buy a black child as a slave. I can't do that anywhere in the world that's been influenced by Christianity.
If we keep going down the road we're going, how do you see the future of the UK faring?
The writing is already on the wall, in the sense of you can see that literally everything about the UK is getting worse. They are undeniably Muslim grooming gangs. You just have to look at the name list of the people that are being convicted. We've got to recognise that the solution to Islamization is Christianization. This is a response to Islamic aggression. Muslims had invaded Christian lands, were attacking Christian populations. The Crusades were not an act of aggression. They were a response to Islamic aggression. And so to defend persecuted Christians, the basic premise of the Crusades is justified according to Christian teaching.
Something that's always blown my mind was this. Currently, 95% of people aren't subscribed. Realistically, we're still starting our journey. But if you like what we're doing and you want to see more, the easiest way for you guys to support us would be to subscribe to the channel down below. Our promise to you is to keep upping our content with bigger guests and better talks. Today's chat with Bob was something which is of huge concern to the whole country. My commitment to you guys is to keep going with contents like this, to find out the truth of what's actually going on and what's in store for us in the future. Anyways, hope you enjoy the show. Very excited to have the chance to talk. I'm forever seeing your clips, and each time I see them, you open my eyes to history, you open my eyes to Christianity, and it's things that, to be honest, I never really gave much thought.
Thank you very much for having me, and I hope... Are you a Christian yet? Have I succeeded that far, or are you still thinking about it?
So, a bit about me. Full disclosure then. So I was born and raised in the UK. I was raised with Christian beliefs to a certain extent. And although younger me didn't much care for it, the older I get, the more grateful and the more proud I am of those beliefs.
Thanks for the good.
But that being said, I'm not actually Christian. I'd probably consider myself agnostic.
Okay. Well, hopefully I can move you a couple of notches by the grace of God.
Okay, well, before we get into religion, the state of the UK, you down in Speaker's Corner, if possible, could you give a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, for those that don't know about me, I go by the pseudonym Bob of Speaker's Corner. The reason for that is that I evangelize amongst radical Muslims, and I think that should be self-explanatory as to what that requires. And also, I do work through social media to evangelize. I work as a full-time evangelist, and so that means I've got my own channel, Bob of Speaker's Corner. And that has resulted in me doing a lot of stuff like building certain networks and building up groups, and trying to build up essentially the body of Christ to rise to the challenges that it faces. And a lot of my time is spent talking about the topic of Christianity, Islam, and modernity, and liberal secular humanism, as these three things are the matrix in which we live and breathe and have our being at the moment. So I come onto channels like this and I talk about it. So and that's part of my evangelistic work.
Yeah, very much appreciate you doing what you do. One last thing before we start. Obviously, with politics and the culture in the UK at the moment, I imagine you're someone who's very quickly labelled, and I imagine you probably receive a fair bit of hate. Someone with strong Christian beliefs, someone who will happily debate anyone and everyone down at Speaker's Corner. And forgive me, I feel a bit silly asking this, but would you say that you hold any hate towards a specific race or a specific country?
No. That's a really easy... It obviously not. As a Christian, our instinct and our heart is to love. And so as a Christian, we try to move out of things like love, hope, faith, joy, peace, goodness, kindness, gentleness, self-control. We're not encouraged to move out of things like anger or malice or bitterness. I mean, I'm a human being just like everyone else, so I can get angry just like everybody else, and I do get angry just like everybody else. But I don't sit on my anger. I don't hold on to my anger. And so, no, there's no hatred towards others. I evangelize Muslims because I think that they're wonderful human beings, and I also think they make absolutely great Christians. And so that's why I evangelize them, because I love them.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we got that out there. I know online you have a lot of critics, and people could easily turn around and say you're just lying. But one, I don't think that's your character, and two, I think it's important to hear these things directly from the person. All right, cool, out of the way. So I watched you in another podcast, and you're talking about the film The Life of Brian, how comedy films which joke or lightheartedly mock Christianity. Would you personally take offense to that?
Yes. And the reason, it would depend, like what's being mocked exactly. So if someone's, taking the piss out of the Pope, or mocking the bishops, or even mocking me, I'll not get offended by that. If someone is mocking Jesus Christ, or the apostles, or the mother of our Lord, I'm going to be offended by those things. And the reason, and that shouldn't come as a shock to anyone. My entire life is built around their teachings and in devotion to the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, that's at the very center of my world. And so if someone's mocking that, it kind of feels personal. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to people. I think that the point that I was making with Liam, which is Liam Tufts from The Dozen, the point that I was making to Liam is that when you start poisoning the root of your culture, like The Life of Brian does, but I mean, The Life of Brian's quite late on the scene in terms of mocking and attacking the Christian faith, but when you start poisoning your culture like that, what you do is you begin to dilute the raison d'etre for your culture, and that results and leads people to a place where they don't take seriously the doctrines that our civilization is built on, and your values come from your doctrines. So if you mock the source of your doctrines, if you start hacking away at the story from which the doctrines of your culture come from, you actually start to divest from the values that arise from those doctrines, and thus you end up harming your own culture and your own society. And I don't think a lot of liberals have caught on to this. And the truth is that the Christian faith is not committed to freedom of speech. It's not a scriptural belief. It emerges from natural philosophy. And one of the reasons why liberals find it so hard to deal with Islamists is precisely because of their values, such as the freedom of speech. And I mean, not that progressive liberals have held on to that. They've introduced their own sort of versions of blasphemy. But as a Christian, we believe that truth should be free, and therefore there should be no impediment on speaking the truth. But the thing about blasphemy, and the thing about is that it's not a reasoned argument. As a Christian, I got no problem with people criticizing my faith and making a reasoned argument. But the thing about ridicule and blasphemy is that it is not a reasoned argument. And it comes from places within the soul that are not good for the people that are doing it. It comes from contempt. It comes from pride. It comes from hatred, and so it's not just harmful for that individual, but what it does is it gives that invective into the culture. And you've got to be able to see that there is a line between the self-hatred of so many progressives in our culture and the people that came up with the life of Brian. Like these two things are not disassociated from one another. That one gives rise to the other.
Yeah, see, it's interesting because in some cases, I could 100% agree. There are some films which are just so outright antagonizing to Christianity. Like there's not even really the comedic factor, you know? But with the life of Brian, you know, I feel it's just so funny, you know, and humor, if it works, it works. And for that film, it wasn't so much, in my eyes anyway, mocking Christianity. It was just mocking the situation, you know. And I mean, so the question which I had in my mind when I watched you talk about the first time was, you know, there's those who would argue that if you start to put blocks on humor, then you're actually starting to stunt growth and stunt creativity.
Okay, so firstly, I acknowledge that Life of Brian is a brilliant film from a comedic perspective. You know, I'm able to see its genius. You know, and particularly it's genius within an English culture, because it only works if you were the English of that period in which it was made, right? So within its own setting, it's a marvel. But the problem is, comedic genius doesn't justify blasphemy. It's not a justification for blasphemy, because you've got to understand the harm that it does, which is that you start to poison the very well from which you're drinking. You start to, if I was to go, you know, like this poison that I'm putting in to the well from which the village is drinking, it's okay because it tastes really good. It doesn't make it any less harmful. And the problem with a lot of the people that are arguing against the idea of blasphemy is that they are saying that their argument comes from, well, it's entertaining. And that's not a good argument. Give me something better than it's entertaining. Because the reality is, if you value entertainment more than the very root and foundation of your culture and identity, then something has gone drastically wrong with your set of values. Entertainment can't be the justification for hacking away at the very source of our doctrines and values, and that is what the Life of Brian does. That is what lots of blasphemous comedy does. And let's not forget that the progressive now have created a double standard. The progressive liberal have created a double standard in which you can mock openly Christianity, but if you mock openly Islam, you could be arrested. You can burn a Bible and not be arrested, but you burn a Quran and you will get arrested. You know, you've got to ask yourself, how did we get to that position? And the Life of Brian was a stepping stone on that road, on that journey. You know, and we can see it now in hindsight. Like when we look back, we can see it. But so the important thing is, just like with everything, we've got to learn the lesson. You know, and realize that the people that defended the Life of Brian were wrong. Now, you talked about, well, if we start putting restrictions on for blasphemy, don't we shut down creativity? Well, in some ways, yes, we shut down certain avenues of creativity, but it's not a limit on creativity. The thing about the creative is that the creative will find other ways to be creative. If you just say, okay, we're not going to allow blasphemy, that still allows people to be creative in other ways, on other topics, on other issues. And I want to be clear, I'm not I'm not saying that Christianity should be above, that every aspect of the Christian faith should be above ridicule, right? Feel free to ridicule the Archbishop of Canterbury. Feel free to ridicule the Pope. Feel free to ridicule, when they're doing a bad job, feel free to mock them. Feel free to mock me. Feel free to mock the church. Feel free to, to mock aspects of church life and church culture, right? There's plenty to go at there, right?
Sure.
But the things that are connected to the Christian story are the very basis from which the doctrines of our civilization emerge. And that doctrines are what give rise to our values. So if you start poisoning that Christian story, you start to poison the well of our culture. And we now have seen the effects of that. We now see where that leads. And it's just like, learn the lesson. You do that in every other aspect of your life. When you cock up, you go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And you'd learn for next time. Well, let's learn the lesson and go, okay, we shouldn't have done that. Let's go back to what the Bible was saying all along in the Ten Commandments.
Sure. And then when people do make these things, though, would that cause you to ever be violent against the people who made it?
The answer is no, obviously. Like, I might be violent to the art itself. Like, I'm not behind the door of ripping up a picture or taking a hammer to a statue. Like, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I don't promise that I wouldn't destroy the art, but I wouldn't destroy the person or seek to destroy the person. And the reason for that is that the person is made in the image of God. The human person is the art of God. And I love the one who made that art. And the human person is made in the image of God. And so the human person, even of a blasphemer, is more sacred to me than my own sense of outrage. And so, no, I wouldn't seek to hurt the person. Though, if I was confronted with a piece of blasphemous art, it is possible. I'm not saying that I would go out and consciously do this, but it is possible that I might just decide, right, that's it. I'm gonna, I'm gonna rip this picture up, or I'm gonna push this statue over. But I wouldn't go about and consciously plan to do that. That would be an in the moment kind of reality. And I'm just being honest about my own temperament. If someone was being blasphemous in a comedy show, I might disrupt the whole show, and heckle the guy from the stage until I'm either thrown out by the bouncers or until the whole comedy program is just stopped. But being violent towards someone would be a step too far. I do believe, though, that the state should punish people who deliberately blaspheme.
Like as a public display, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you've spoken about this before, but the reaction from, say, Islam would be very different. Then we don't really see any mockery or lighthearted comedies made towards this religion. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I mean, you do. There are examples like who's the guy who was Mr. Bean?
Rowan Atkinson.
Rowan Atkinson. He was involved in a comedy program that once took the piss out of the Ayatollah and Islamic prayer, and I think they did a scene where Muslims were bowing down in prostration. And they sort of catchphrased it as, Muslims help the Ayatollah to find his contact lenses, and it's kind of like, so there has been certainly mocking and the satanic verses by Salman Rushdie was obviously that wasn't aimed at mocking. Actually, it's actually got very little to do with Islam. There's there's the slitherest of overlaps between Islam and the substance of the satanic verses, which just goes to show how easily the Muslim Ummah can be whipped up into a frenzy by Islamists when actually there's no reason for it. And the Psalm and the satanic verses is a perfect example of that. We've got to a point in the West where, because of the cowardice of the political elites, and it is cowardice, it is actually fear of the Muslim community, that we are being policed and we're being judged in the courts by double standards. And the blasphemy issue brings that up quite interestingly. So you had that little boy in a primary in a high school who scuffed a Quran because he got into a tussle, and the police forced him and his mother to apologize in front of an entire mosque. That's ridiculous. That police officer and all the police officers involved in that should be sacked. They should be disciplined. That child did nothing wrong. That parent did nothing wrong. Then you've got the Batley and Spen teacher who was actually just trying to educate around blasphemy. And he's now in hiding and has been in hiding, abandoned by the Labour Party, abandoned by the trade unions, abandoned by the government, because he tried to teach on blasphemy and he used images of Muhammad. And the state is failing to tackle that. But yet when that guy recently, just a couple of weeks ago, burnt a copy of the Quran in protest at the murder of a guy in Sweden, whose name I can't remember, I'm afraid. They arrested him, and they've arrested people for desecrating the Quran or for displaying mocking images of Muhammad. And so we've got this double standard that's occurred, and it's entirely because of cowardice, because the elites manage themselves by an economy of fear, and they guide their behavior by who they fear the most.
When you're talking about elites, now are you talking about MP level, or are you going even beyond that?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what you might imagine is beyond that. I'm talking about the ruling village, the ruling town of elites. So that's your MPs, your top civil servants, your top police officers, your top judges, your journalists, top industrialists. They all go to the same ski villages. They all go to the same high-end restaurants. They all go to the same high-end hotels. They hang out in the same areas, same bars. They're all friends with one another. There's an incestuous relationship between politicians and journalism, and so
Sure.
And so these are the ruling elites. These are the people that rule and manage our society, and they're part of an international club, because there's a similar ruling elite in America. There's a similar ruling elite in Germany and France, in all sort of Western countries, and they all hang out together at the World Economic Forum and all these other international bodies, where they rub their shoulders and pat one another on the back and congratulate one another on how successful they all are. And those are the ruling elites that I'm talking about.
Yes. So in this case, I would agree, the globalists, if you like. And, part of me feels there's a lot of areas where you could easily point out that multiculturalism isn't working. And I can understand what you're saying with the MPs, because when they dictate a policy or whatever, they're putting themselves in direct danger, right? Depending on what they say, they'll get instant kickback or they get a pat on the back. But whereas the globalists, if you will, they're kind of sweet, whatever direction we go. But, part of me feels that by having the public at each other's throats, it means that's where the attention is and not on them. And obviously this is a much more favorable outcome. And in my eyes, it just seems like classic divide and conquer.
I don't lean into sort of conspiratorial narratives, and what your question implies is an almost conspiratorial narrative. The first thing that I would say is that there isn't one global elite. There are
No.
competing global elites. So the global elites of China, Iran, Russia, and Turkey, and they're one global elite, and they're competing with the global elites of North America, Western Europe, Australasia, and then you've got an African global elite that's just doing their own thing, a Latin American global elite that's doing their own thing, and these global elites are in competition with one another to some degree. Certainly, the Northern Hemisphere global elites are in competition with one another. I know less about the Southern Hemisphere global elites. So there's not one global elite. That would be the first thing that I say. The second thing that I would say is that they're not. There's definitely some sections of the global elites of the West that just don't get touched because they're out of sight. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's the journalists and the MPs that are very visible, but your global elites who are bankers and top civil servants, and then they're more out of the way. Your top judges, they're more out of the way. They don't get the media attention. They don't get exposed as much for what they're doing, even though they're very much a part and parcel of what's happening. And so, yeah, it's not the case that all parts of the global elite are as exposed, But as to divide and conquer, I mean, that no one is pitting Christians against Muslims. Christians and Muslims have been opposed to one another for 1,400 years. We were opposed to one another before the nation state was even born, before there were any global elites, before there was a globalism. In fact, the church in Islam helped to form globalism, actually. So it's not that people are trying to pit Muslims against Christians. We've got a historical beef that goes back 1,400 years. Because Muslims invaded Christian lands, tried to destroy Christian civilization, and have for 1,400 years tried to conquer Christian territories and oppress Christian peoples. I mean, that's prior to any nation state or any global elite ever existing.
See, I completely agree with you. And the thing is, because that history is so well known, you would think, well, obviously, if you're going to put X amount of Islam with Christians, this isn't going to bode well. And because it sounds so obvious, you're like, well, why would someone make such a rookie error? The big question, which is on my mind, and I think is on quite a lot of people's minds right now, is it possible for Christianity and Islam to coexist? Or is it that the two are just oil and water and they need to be segregated?
Okay, so I'll deal with all the points that you made. So firstly, you made an assumption that the history of Islam and Christianity is well known. And maybe it is to the circles that perhaps watch me, and obviously you've watched me, so maybe that includes you. But outside of the little circles of apologetics and polemicists and debaters, the history of Islam and Christianity is not well known. So for the sake of your views, I am going to give a summary from a Christian perspective, which is that for 1,400 years, there hasn't been a single year, not one, in 1,400 years, not a single year has not had some Islamic army somewhere attacking some Christian population, seeking to enslave and to persecute the Christian population. Not one in 1,400. And I think people need to let that fact settle into their minds. The last time in Europe that we had Islamic armies crying out Allahu Akbar whilst attacking Christian populations was just in the 1990s. In the Yugoslav breakup, and also in the Kosovan, the Serbian Kosovan war. And so you had Islamic militias crying out Allahu Akbar whilst attacking Christian populations just as recently as that. And obviously it gets even more recent if you include the Middle East. It gets even more recent if you include Africa. You know, if we include Africa, I can just say it happened last week. If we include the Middle East, I can say it happened last week. Do you see my point?
Wow.
So this is the point that lots of people don't understand. So I have no apology for what I say next, which is that Islam, whenever Islam dominates, Christians are persecuted. And so every Christian is obliged to oppose Sharia law wherever it is in the world. As a religious obligation, we must oppose Sharia law. Islam and Christianity cannot coexist if by coexist you mean as equal citizens. Because wherever Islam dominates, Christians are reduced to second-class citizens. We're reduced to a status called dhimmi. And that is a second-class citizen. It's a religious apartheid. And the truth is that even if Christians were the ones that dominated, we would have to curtail Sharia law. So from the Islamic perspective, they would feel that they're not given equal rights, because as Christians we wouldn't allow Sharia law to operate. So whether Christians are in charge or whether Muslims are in charge, they're going to end up limiting the other. But Christians would at least allow Muslims equality under the law. I'll give you one example of that. So in Islam, they have this concept of like for like punishment. So if you take a life, you lose a life, right? It's like for like, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Except that it only applies amongst Muslims. So if a Muslim takes the life of a Christian, the Christians can't demand the life of the Muslim. There's no equality under the law. Now, one of the advantages that would happen if Christians were dominating Muslim populations is even though Sharia law would be prohibited, the Muslims would at least have equality under Christian law. So if whatever the punishment was for a Christian for taking the life of a Christian would be the same punishment if a Christian took the life of a Muslim. And so even though they would be ruled by Christian law, they would at least have equality under that law. Whereas in Sharia law, not only wouldn't we be allowed to practice our faith fully, which is something that Christians would do to Muslims, but we wouldn't even have equality under Sharia law.
Right.
We wouldn't
Right.
because that concept is not a Quranic concept, but it is a biblical concept. And so Islam now, and so this comes back to this question of multiculturalism. You know, in terms of a liberal secular society, the birth of multiculturalism came about because it actually had its antecedents back in the 1800s, when you had when you had the rights given to Christian minorities and to Catholics. I'm talking about within the British context, obviously. Different countries would have had their own journey. So I'm just speaking about within the English context. So in the 1800s, and actually with antecedents going back to the 1600s, you had the giving of equal rights to religious minorities in England. And so you ended up with I'll call it multi-faith. It wasn't multiculture, or multi-religious society. Multi-religious society is the best way to describe it. Then in the 1950s and 60s, when we started with immigration, we obviously started bringing in populations, many of whom were Christian, but had different cultures, but also many from around the empire at the time, and around the Commonwealth, who were not Christian. And a doctrine started to emerge where we celebrate these different cultures. But the only way that the liberals could celebrate those cultures was to push Christianity backwards, to remove increasingly Christianity from public life so that it could make space for this other group, whether that other group be Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim. And so intrinsically at the heart of multiculturalism is Christophobia. Multiculturalism is at its root Christophobic. Liberalism is at its root Christophobic. At its heart, it is a Christophobic ideology. And so Christians are consistently pushed aside, harangued, treated differently under the law because of the inherent biases and anti-Christian narrative of liberalism and its social doctrine of multiculturalism. And it creates a world in which, and the thing about liberal secular humanism is that it cannot in any way resist Islamization. Because the thing about liberalism is it is powered by the demos. It is powered by the population. And so it moves and maneuvers and bends itself to whatever the majority population is, whatever the bigger population is. And it doesn't factor into the contract between citizen and state the religious identity of the citizen. And so ideologically, liberal secular humanism is blind to the threat of Islamization. And that is where Christianity is the antidote to liberalism. Because as Christians, we've in the church, we've practiced multiculturalism for 2,000 years. We don't need any lectures from liberals about how to do multiculturalism. We already have done it. And our version of multiculturalism works. Go into any good church, you're going to see people of different ethnicities, different groups, all worshipping together. You know, we're ahead of everybody in terms of multiculturalism. But the difference between Christian multiculturalism and liberal multiculturalism is that in Christian multiculturalism, we have common values and common doctrines. And even though those common values and common doctrines may express themselves differently culturally, you know, the Afro-Caribbean is much more vibrant in their celebration of Easter and Christmas and funerals than, say, the Anglo-Saxon, which is more dour and somber and contemplative, you know. And I'm not knocking either there. I'm happy with both.
Right, but they're different.
But they are different, but they have common values and common doctrines. Whereas liberal multiculturalism says, you have your doctrines, you have your doctrines, you live by your values, you live by your values. And that's a recipe for civil war. And it has emerged upon the horizon of political discourse in the United Kingdom. We have people now openly talking about civil war in the UK.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think tensions are definitely high. I mean, it's interesting that you're saying liberalism follows the majority. I still think Christianity, even though it's not above 50%, it's still the majority of the UK. And in fact, I loved what you said, how no one's really getting exactly what they want. Whoever's in charge means that everyone else isn't fully happy, right? And that's just the way it's going to always be. But the benefit with Christianity, at least it treats everyone as equals. And obviously liberalism is taking full advantage of that. And it tries to promote the same thing, but you're right, it's kind of blind to the fact that if Sharia law was in place, that equality is now gone. Actually, and it's kind of still obviously a huge topic right now. With what you were saying with Sharia law, where you were saying it becomes a two-tier state, if you will.
It become a religious apartheid.
Is that the reason behind all of these attacks on the white British girls in the UK right now?
A couple of things to bring out there is that it's questionable whether Christianity is the majority. I think that a lot of people identify as Christian who don't actually believe anything Christian or practice anything Christian. To them, Christian is just a label. And then you move from those people that just have it as a label to increasing degrees of commitment. And at some point, you would maybe call some people on that spectrum cultural Christians. And then you move beyond that to actual Christians, people who are committed, people who are living their life by the Christian story, which is very different from the liberal secular story, and maybe we could get into that if you wanted to. But the thing is, Christians could have much more influence in our society if we recovered our sense of identity. Because what has happened since the 1700s, from 1765 onwards, is that Christianity has been replaced as the loci of identity with other identities like national identities. And our culture has been increasingly stripped of its Christian core and stripped of its Christian symbology and stripped of its Christian identity. And some of that is actually connected to the Reformation. And this idea, well, is I can't see it in the Bible, so I'm not going to do it, right? And so actually certain branches of the Christian church were participant in taking away their own Christian, the symbols of their own Christian identity. And that means that we're not a visible demos, we're not a visible consumer. And the thing about liberalism is that it bends around the visible consumer. And so as Christians, we need to recover our Christian identity and to express it confidently as a complete way of life, including its cultural practices, like the practice of Lent, like the practice of Advent, like the celebration of Easter, like the celebration of Christmas, like the celebration of All Saints' Day, like the processions, And we need to embody this with a confidence and a zeal that says that if someone doesn't like that public expression of our faith, our public identity as Christians, and they try to stop us, then we're not going to be stopped. And that we're quite willing to be martyred and imprisoned and persecuted for our faith. And actually, we are going to stand up for ourselves. The problem with the English is that the English have been atomized. They just see themselves as individuals. They don't see themselves as a people. They don't see themselves as an identity. And the irony of that is that the English and England were born out of a fight to protect Christian identity. If you look at the story of Alfred the Great and Edward the Elder and Athelstan, they were all fighting to defend the Christian faith. And the Rex Anglorum, or the King of England, was modelled on Alfred the Great, who modelled himself as a noble Christian king. And so the English identity was forged to defend the Christian faith. And we need to recover that. We need to recover that sense of our identity is to defend our Christianity, and to defend the Christian faith. And when we recover that, we will be much better placed to start tackling Islamic grooming gangs and Muslim grooming gangs. And they are undeniably Muslim grooming gangs. You just have to look at the name list of the people that are being convicted and then just count out how many of those names are Muslim, Islamic. The Islamic grooming gangs, I would say, emerged from a couple of things. The first thing that I would say is that I can't find anything in Islamic teaching that would justify it. So that's the first thing that I'd want to say. There's nothing that clearly legitimizes the practices of the Muslim grooming gangs from within Islam. But there is a milieu, a cultural milieu, within the Islamic paradigm to which you can see such an aberration arising from. And that is this idea that in Islam, you're permitted to have sex slaves, that in Islam, the kuffar and the alim al-kitab, which is the Jews and the Christians, are seen as being lesser in value. They are seen to be worse human beings than the Muslim. That Muslims believe in, that they are superior as a community to these other groups. And from this kind of milieu, and they're also taught to have contempt. Islam teaches, the Quran teaches contempt and hatred to the unbeliever, right? So when those four things combined, you can see how it might express itself toxically. And what happened was the Muslim grooming gangs actually first started targeting Sikh girls, right? And the Sikhs went to the police, and the police did nothing. And then the Sikhs actually just organized themselves into a gang and started shooting the people. They literally started killing the grooming gangers, and the Muslim grooming gangs basically went, this is too risky, and they started targeting vulnerable white girls. And they targeted vulnerable white girls because they are vulnerable. English communities, and there's, everyone talks about the blame that we should put, and rightly, on the Muslim grooming gangs, and that's absolutely right. And they talk about the failure of the Labour Party and the police and the social services, and how they should be blamed, and that also is absolutely right. But we also need to ask the question, why were those girls vulnerable in the first place? What was it about the English working class communities that meant that those girls were such easy targets, and are still such easy targets? Because let's be clear, it's still happening. It hasn't stopped. The state has not got on top of the problem. It's still going on. So what is it about the English working class communities that have meant that they're such easy pickings? And at core, when you really dig down deep, it's because the English have lost their Christian identity.
See, it's really interesting. I could probably attribute other reasons why that might be the case as well. Like, I feel in general, like if, for example, let's look at mass immigration, and Japan is famous for saying, we absolutely don't want any mass immigration. And the whole world kind of doesn't really bat an eyelid. And they would openly say things like, well, we want to keep Japan, Japan. Again, completely fine. The second a white nation was to say the exact same thing, then instantly this would be labeled as you're racist and this is disgusting and all the rest of it. And I feel like this is stemmed from World War II, obviously Nazis kind of pushing the idea of a superior race and all the rest of it. And it's just left a stain on white people, so much so that like it probably leans into why communities aren't formed, because the fear of being labeled is just too great. Which is a shame, because obviously that means without the communities, like you say, these women are very, very vulnerable.
Firstly, I object to this idea of a white nation. Like there is not this homogeneous blob of people called white or whiteness, right? That is a completely modern construct. I think it comes from America. I think it comes from, I think it probably germinated in America, but it has its antecedents in modernity and colonialism. But the truth is, I'm not white. I am Saxon. And I get insulted when people stick me in this homogenous blob called whiteness, which is to deny my own Saxon identity, right? I am not a Celt. I'm not a Norseman. I'm not a Frank. I'm not a Castilian. I'm a Saxon. I'm not a Jute. I'm not an Angle. Like, do you see where I'm going with this? It's kind of like this nonsense of white nations is ridiculous. there are no white nations. That's rubbish. There are Saxon nations, there are Pictish nations, there are Celtic nations, but there's not white nations. That's rubbish. I really
Right. Right. It almost
reject.
dilutes the culture.
Yeah, I
Just
reject that idea. The Celtic, the Roman Church that came to the UK, the Isles of Britannia, in the first century, was a Roman church. It was white. But when in the 5th century the Saxons pushed out the Romans, that church became Celtic, and the Roman church and the Celtic church looked very different. They had different cultures, but they were both white-skinned. And so this idea that you've got these white nations, it's just an abandonment of the history of these peoples for some, and at the heart of it is a racism. Like this talking of white nations, it is rooted in a historically racist discourse, and so I reject it from start to finish. I've got no problem being proud of my Saxon Christian culture, but I don't set myself against people who aren't white, if you see what I'm saying.
I get you, and I should probably make this clear. Like, I'm not saying this from my point of view. I'm saying this generally. That's how the world speaks of it nowadays.
Yes, and I'm saying that whole discourse is unhealthy. That whole language is unhealthy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah,
but you're right that you were right to say that the trauma of World War II and the post-liberal establishment that was created after World War II has created a culture in which the state is ideologically dispositioned to push against any kind of right-wing narratives, because it's frightened that those right-wing narratives might go back towards National Socialism. And to be fair, National Socialism is something that every Christian should oppose. Yeah, it is evil. It is a sin. And so National Socialism is Antichrist. But the overreaction means that we have this blindness to radical left-wing ideologies. And we have this blindness, this double standard where right-wing political violence is pounded upon, rightly, but left-wing political violence is tolerated. Antifascista is one of the most violent groups in Western societies, and yet they consistently get away with what they do. And so there is this thing where the racists, the genuine racists who permeate the political right, are constantly actually scaring away people from being won to more rational, to more reasonable right-wing perspectives. Because the racists actually do drive them away, because the racists try to infect any right-wing movement that gains momentum. And there is that playoff. But as a Christian, I'm not committed to right-wing political narratives. I'm not committed to left-wing political narratives. As a Christian, I'm committed to a Christian political narrative. It is a Christian politique that I'm committed to. And that's neither left-wing nor right-wing. It goes beyond. And the reason for that is that Christianity is above race. When I became a Christian, I joined a people, the Christian people. But those Christian people are a people not because they have a shared ethnicity or a shared nation or a shared language or a shared culture. They are a people, a singular people, because they share in one covenant, the new covenant that Jesus Christ established. And that is where my identity is, in that new covenant people, the Christian people, the church. That's where my politics emerges from. That's where my aspirations emerge from. And so I'm not interested in keeping white nations white. What I'm interested in is establishing a new Christendom.
Yeah, I think realistically, this homogenous society, if you will, the reality is, I don't think it really comes down to, like you say, the skin color or the ethnicity, wherever you're from. It comes down to the same set of values, and
Yeah.
this is where religion has always been good. And like I say, I'm not religious per se, but like if I was to have kids, I know without a shadow of a doubt, I would probably raise them Christian, just because, you know, simple things, love thy neighbor. These are the values and these are the lessons which I would want to imprint on them.
Okay. What I would say is that if you're talking about raising your children Christian, how much of Christianity do you know? Because a lot of people who are socially conservative, they talk about Christianity in characterized ways. They think about Christianity in cartoonish ways. Like, you know, if you're going to raise your children Christian, which I applaud, and which, God willing, you will have many children, you know, to use the biblical phrase, may your quiver be full. Like I want you to raise your children as Christian. But if you're going to raise your children as Christian, doesn't it make sense that you yourself be a Christian? Doesn't it make sense that you actually understand what that means? Like, would you be raising your children to understand that they are part of the new covenant? Do you understand what that new covenant is? Do you know what it means? Do you know what the church is? Do you know what the church is fighting for? Do you know what the kingdom of God looks like? Like, if you're going to say that you're going to be a Christian, then it's incumbent upon you to know what that means. You know, Kierkegaard, who's a great existential philosopher in Europe, he trembled to call himself Christian because he understood the gravitas of what the claim meant to say that I am a disciple of Christ, that I am a little Christ. And so my encouragement to you is, yes, raise your children as Christian, become Christian yourself, but don't fall into the liberal, socially conservative trap of treating Christianity like a cliche, like it's something that's just good for us. Because if you treat Christianity like something that is just a social good, then it can actually do you no good at all. You know, Os Guinness, who's a famous philosopher at the Ark Conference, I think I've got his name right. He did a talk at the Ark Conference in which he made that very point, which is that if you just treat Christianity like it is something that's good for society, that it is just a set of values, then it can do you absolutely no good at all, because that is not what Christianity is about.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I think in the sense of, like, my understanding, especially compared to someone like yourself, Bob, very, very basic. But when I think about some of the basic things of everyone is treated like an equal, of defending those who are in need, having no one above or beneath you, this is what I mean by the values I would want them to adopt. And you are right. The problem I find myself in, you know, I could agree. I'd like I say, very basic knowledge on Christianity, but I generally, from all that I've heard, I could agree with most of it. The bit where I have a bit of conflict, well, there's a few, and we'll get into them a little bit later. But one of the big ones is having Jesus in your heart, and I honestly don't know what people mean by that. I don't. Some people talk about him as a metaphor. Some people talk about him as if it's a person you've physically seen, and it's like as real as your friend is, you know? And I think for me personally, if I was to say I was a Christian, then this would be a lie. It'd almost be mocking the religion. The aspects of self-growth and being a better person, completely agree with. And I would almost join Christianity just for that aspect. But I think it would be an insult to God if I said someone was in my heart when they're not.
Yeah, so I mean, you're a victim, unfortunately, of church speak. And for any Christians that are watching this, I implore you to stop using church speak when you're speaking to non-Christians. because you're not helpful, and all you're doing is confusing emotivism with the real living of the Christian faith. The point that I would make is this: that in terms of what we mean when we talk about Jesus in our heart, what we mean is that discipleship in the Lord Jesus Christ, and that means being a student of Jesus Christ, is our first and highest value. That we organize our life around being the best student of Jesus that we can be. If you were going to summarize the Christian faith in one sentence, it would be the best student of Jesus Christ you can be. Take seriously everything he says. Everything he says about you, everything he says about himself, and everything he says about the world. And that's what being a Christian is. It's being a student of Jesus. And when you organize your life like that, you can call yourself a Christian. When you accept what Jesus says about himself and what he says about you and what he says about the world, and you seek to organize yourself and your life according to his teachings, then you are a Christian. And so in terms of having Jesus in your heart, it's that personal commitment to Jesus. It's saying, right, Jesus, I'm not just going to see you now as a historical figure. I'm going to see you now as my Lord. I'm going to see you now as my Savior. I'm going to see you now as my God. I'm going to see you now as the Messiah. And that's what we call enthroning. To use church speak, that's what we call enthroning Jesus in your life, enthroning him in your heart. It means that you put him at the center, and you organize yourself that way. Now, the thing is, you mentioned some Christian values, and you said I want to embody them. But what I want to encourage you to understand is that there is a connection between doctrines, what you believe, and your values, because your values emerge from your doctrines. And so you can't have Christian values unless you have Christian doctrines. That was the big failure of modernity. That was the big failure of the Enlightenment. That's how we ended up in the mess that we are now in, is that in the Enlightenment, what they did is they said, well, we like these Christian values, but we've got no time for this mystical doctrinal metaphysics. And so we'll chuck away the metaphysics and we'll just try to keep the Christian values. And if you look at the early Enlightenment, that was the project. But it has resulted in the mess that we're now in, because you can't maintain the values unless you have the beliefs that underpin them. I'll give you a concrete example to make it clear. Christians believe in the imatio Dei, the image of God. And from that doctrine of the image of God, we have a value, the value of life, the importance of life, which is the reason why I would not use violence against a blasphemer, even though they've blasphemed. Though I might smash up their art, I'd never hurt them physically. The reason for that is because of my value of life. The fact that they are made in the image of God gives them a value just by living. Now, because the Western Enlightenment stopped believing in the doctrine of the image of God, that you and I and everyone else are made in the image of God, we've started to lose the value of life. And life now is being rationalized. It's being judged upon rational paradigms. So the elderly and the sick and those that are dying are now seen to be of less value to life, less value in society than those that are healthy and working. And that's why we're bringing in a euthanasia bill. The unborn are seen to be less valuable than the mothers that are who are pregnant with them, and so we allow abortion. And so you can't maintain Christian values if you don't maintain Christian doctrines.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's When just to go back a little bit, you were saying earlier how the elites are scared of the Islamic religion, so that's why, in a sense, they bend the knee. So, would it be fair to say, because Christianity has such a forgiving nature, this is why it's constantly taken advantage of? And the example I want to give is obviously we saw it in the Olympic ceremony, where it was clearly making a mockery of the Last Supper, and it seemed to be as antagonizing as possible. They obviously they got backlash, and they quickly kind of said like, oh no, the two aren't related. But is this where Islam has kind of got protection and then Christianity is just openly attacked?
Yeah, the liberal elites would never have mocked Islam so blatantly as they did the Christian Last Supper. But the thing is, it isn't any the weakness that you're seeing from Christians in the West has nothing to do with Christianity. It's to do with the fact that those Christians are compromised by liberalism. So the weakness amongst Christians isn't to do with Christianity in the church, it's to do with liberalism in the church. It's to do with this idea, this Ned Flanders cartoonish understanding of the Christian faith, that it's just this private expression of devotion and that it's not actually something that should involve politics and culture. So that's liberalism that has weakened the church that way, and certain aspects of Reformation theology that's played out badly, that I would argue are erroneous. But interestingly enough, there was actually a big pushback against that. Christians are starting to rediscover their strength, and there was actually a pushback against the Olympics opening ceremony that resulted, I believe, in an apology and also a lot of backtracking from the people that organized the event. And so actually I was quite encouraged by the fact. I know certainly in London there were protests outside the French embassy run by the Disciples of Christ street protest movement, and I think there was at least 2 protests outside the French embassy connected to the opening of the Olympics that were organized separately, as well as other things. But I want to encourage my Christian brothers and sisters that if you want people to respect you, you have to stand up for yourself. And there's nothing in the Christian faith that says that you can't stand up for yourself. There's nothing in the Christian teaching that says that you can't stand up for yourself. And actually, the Christian faith encourages us to be bold in our faith. We're not allowed to deny Christ publicly. Christ said, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before the Father. We're told as Christians to be as bold as lions, to be as wise as serpents, but as gentle as sheep, as gentle as doves. But gentleness doesn't mean passivity. Gentleness doesn't mean apathy. Gentleness doesn't mean being bullied or not defending yourself or not standing up for yourself. It just means that the normative temperament of the Christian is to be as gentle as the context allows you to be. And obviously, depending on the context, that the dial might be shifted up as to what gentleness looks like.
Right. I mean, there was a survey in 2016. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but did you see it did a survey to UK Muslims, and it was talking about the introduction of Sharia law, and only 22% of UK Muslims actually opposed it. 43 were in favor of some of it, and then you had 16% who strongly supported it. How big of a concern is that exactly?
I'll just backtrack a bit, so I can run into this question as well. The reason why the liberal elites won't mock Islam in the way that they mock Christianity, as I say, because they are afraid. And the reason why they are afraid is that they are aware that radicalization amongst the Muslim community is not decreasing but increasing. The United Kingdom is a net exporter of Islamic radicalism. The argument inside the Muslim community between those that want to integrate into Western culture and those that want to practice a radical form of Islam is going the wrong way. Radical Islam is gaining in traction amongst the Muslim community. The number of Muslims being radicalized is getting higher, not lower. And this is the point that I would make to my brothers and sisters and to any other sensible person that's listening. But certainly to the Christians, I would say this: it does not matter if you don't want the contest. It does not matter if you don't want to do the game of chess. That contest and that game of chess is being done to you, regardless of what you do. And so the reality for Christians is you either get with the reality and you organize yourself to deal with that reality, or you will find yourself checkmated. I don't know how do you conjugate that properly. You're checkmated without even being able to respond. And so my message to Christians is you've got to wake up. You've got to wake up. It does not matter what you want. The Islamists are playing the game to win. And so you must also play the game to win. And the problem with the liberal elites is that their ideology doesn't allow them to do what is necessary to deal with the problem, because their ideology is what is giving space for the radicalization. There are no good liberal answers to the problem of Islamic radicalization, because when you work within the liberal paradigm, there is no grounds upon which you can counter it, because liberalism works by the demos. And so if Muslims want to Islamify a society, up to the point of them using force, they can be allowed to. But the problem is, if you allow Islamification to continue unchecked, at some point you'll reach a point where you can't even deal with the violent elements within the radicalized community, because you have encumbered yourself through allowing Islamization. And that's why liberalism can't deal with this problem. That's why we need to return to a muscular Christianity and the commitment to building a new Christendom, because Christians can deal with radical Islamists.
Well, it certainly has in the past. I mean, I feel right now you've got it from two angles. One, there already is almost a two-tier society, because we've already seen how to not be seen as racist, just like we've seen with the groomer gangs, they'll happily ignore certain ethnicities, certain religions. However, when it comes to British people or the public, if you show patriotism, chances are you're going to be in trouble. And, we're seeing people get arrested for that right now.
Yeah, I'm not particularly interested in defending patriotism, because I don't think there's anything about the British state at the moment to be patriotic towards.
No, but my point is that we're seeing a two-tier system. And you're right. If you're someone who's going to live with your head in the sand, that's all well and good. But if Islam has an agenda, which they've carried out for X amount of years, and they're showing no signs of stopping, when you live with your head in the sand, soon you're going to find you're surrounded. And you're right. The moment when you could have done something is now gone. And
then you're powerless to actually stop the more violent elements. And that is the process that we're seeing in the West, And the two-tier system, we can give examples. Like, for instance, Christians will be arrested for praying outside of abortion clinics, even if they're just praying silently in their head, because it is harassing, it is said, to people who want to murder their children. But yet, blocking up entire streets to do Islamic prayer, and it is not considered harassing to people who want to move through that street. Or the fact that Christians might be arrested for preaching using some audio device that projects their voice, and they say something that's offensive, is dealt with by the police, but Muslims are allowed to project the adhan, which is an offensive statement, into people's homes through megaphones. Now, and there's lots of other examples we've already talked about. You can desecrate Bibles, but you'll get arrested for desecrating the Quran. We've seen. I know of examples where Christians have been violently attacked by Muslims for doing table evangelism. When you put out a table with books, and the police don't arrest the people who have done that because they're Muslims. But if a Christian were to kick over a Muslim table, I'm sure the police would act on that. And so you've got we're all very aware of the fact that there's a two-tier system going on, but you've got to understand that it's rooted in fear, it's rooted in intimidation. Like the liberal elites are completely intimidated, and so the solution to that is certainly for the Christians. We've got to recognize that the solution to Islamization is Christianization. The solution to Islamization is Christianization. I'll give you one example. So one example of Islamization is the fact that more and more institutions, public bodies like NHS hospitals and stuff, are by default serving halal meat to everybody. Why are they doing that? They are doing that because if you don't serve halal meat, Muslims complain. If you do serve halal meat, everyone else just eats it. So again, the demos, the visible consumer, is dictating the agenda. Now, Christians can't fund the missionary efforts of others, right? It's against our faith to do that. We can't fund Mormon missionaries or Jehovah's Witness missionaries. We can't fund, therefore, Muslim missionaries either. Halal meat funds zakat. Zakat funds Islamic dawah. So Christians can't eat halal meat because it funds Muslim missionaries directly. And so Christians need to push back. We need to say, no, we, for religious reasons, cannot eat halal meat. You must serve me non-halal meat. And that's just one example, but you can extrapolate that outwards more and more. Christians should be complaining about voice-projected adhans and saying that this shouldn't be blasted into my home. Like, fine, let them have the adhan, but there's no need for the megaphone. Like, how long would I be on a street corner if I went into a Muslim area, stood on a street corner in just Muslim housing area, majority Muslim housing area, and then just started blasting out the gospel through a megaphone? Yeah. How quickly would it be before I'm shoved off by the police? And yet mosques are allowed to do that to non-Muslims all the time. So we've got to push back. We've got to use up the fullness of our rights within the law. We've got to have a clear sense of our own culture and wish, all these people that complain about Muslims praying in the street, I just say, stop whinging. You can pray in the street, so go and do it.
Sure.
Stop complaining that the Muslims have a big festival to celebrate Eid. Go and organize a Christian festival to celebrate the aspects of the Christian faith, like Easter and Christmas. Yeah. But the point is, when I say celebrate Christmas, what I don't mean is celebrate liberal secular Christmas. I mean, celebrate actual Christmas, the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ. Not, I'm going to have turkey, get myself stuffed, and then pass out some presents. That's not celebrating Christmas. Do you see my point? You've got, before you can assert a culture, you've got to have a sense of your own culture. And we need to assert a Christian culture.
Am I right in saying that both Christianity and Islam, they both want to convert people to their religions?
Yes.
If a Christian was to convert to Islam, would there be any punishment to that?
Within the Christian faith, it's not mandated, no. But it's not forbidden either. So within the Christian faith, that such a thing would be decided by the secular government. But there's nothing in the Christian faith that mandates a punishment for someone leaving the Christian faith. Actually, the only scriptures that there are is that if someone leaves the Christian faith, that we should lovingly seek to draw them back to the faith and to save what was lost, the lost sheep parable, and the idea of going and winning our brother back to the faith. But the secular government may take from that means to discourage people from leaving the Christian faith, but that would depend upon how they decide to implement Christian values. So there's nothing explicitly that calls for a punishment. No.
And if it was the other way around, if someone from Islam wanted to convert to Christianity, what would happen there?
There's explicit commands to punish those that leave the Islamic faith and choose any religion other than Islam. It says in the hadiths that a Muslim can only be killed for one of three reasons. One is that they murder another Muslim unjustly. Two is that they commit adultery. And three is that they leave the religion of Islam. Now, the problem with that is that inside the UK, I know for a fact, because I know the people personally and directly, there are internally displaced people inside the UK. There are literally internal refugees within the UK who have been driven out of their home city, for the crime of becoming a Christian. And they've been harassed, they've been attacked, there's been murder attempts,
Wow.
Against people, Muslims, for becoming Christians. And the British state doesn't want to face up to this problem, again, because of liberalism, because of the weakness of liberalism, because the state knows that if it really tried to tackle this problem, it would inflame the passions of the Islamists, who would then inflame the passions of the really traditional conservative Muslims. And that would create a problem for the British state. And so it chooses to ignore this problem. Just like it has chosen, the only time the British state chose to deal with the grooming gangs is when there was a pushback from the EDL, from the patriotic movement. And they realized that actually, if we don't get a handle of this, that people are going to get angry and it could spur a response. And then they went, we need to actually start dealing with this problem. And so you've got this situation where the British state consistently seeks to follow the path of least resistance. And this is the problem with liberalism, is that, it all works by the demos. It's all about trying to govern by the visible majority, by the loudest voices. It's the chick that cries the loudest gets heard and fed, and the chick that doesn't starves. But a Christian state would deal with this. A Christian state would say that we are going to proactively defend converts from Islam to Christianity. And we are going to proactively pursue anyone who harasses or harms a convert to Christianity. Not just give it lip service like the liberals do, but actually we're going to go in there and we're going to do stuff. Like if you harass a convert to Christianity, your door's getting kicked in, you're being arrested, you're being put on trial, you're going to prison, you're losing your business, you're losing your children. Like because we shouldn't allow radicals to raise children. Like, you know, and so a Christian state can do illiberal things to deal with Islamic radicalism that a liberal state won't do because of its own liberal values. You know, and so there's examples of Christians being murdered around the world for the crime of becoming a Christian. And there are examples, and you know, the church needs to do a much better job in speaking up about this. But inside the UK, there are Christians who have had to flee from their homes because of the sheer level of Christophobic prejudice within the Muslim community.
Have you been successful in converting people from Islam to Christianity?
Yes, quite a number. A happy number. A number that at the end of my life I will be able to look back in and go, yes, I did something.
Are you worried that you're going to be targeted by a radical Islamist?
That at some point will increase. You know, it is that likelihood increases the more you go down this road. But the thing is, and this is one of the things that liberalism doesn't give you that Christianity does, is that as a Christian, I'm not scared of being martyred. As a Christian, I'm not scared of dying for my faith. As a Christian, I don't fear death. And so I can't be intimidated by Islamist violence. Whereas liberals, as we've seen again and again and again, can and are intimidated by liberal violence, by Islamist violence. And so, you know, if you look at Speaker's Corner right now, Speaker's Corner is an environment in which, when I first went there 6 years ago, there were many different groups at Speaker's Corner, all talking about different things. Fast forward 6 years to the present, and it's pretty much just Christians and Muslims, because all the other groups have been bullied out, not by Christians, but by the Muslims at Speaker's Corner. The only group that they can't bully out are the Christians, because we're just not afraid. And the Bible is replete with this command: be not afraid, be not afraid, stand firm, be courageous. You know, and so the Christian faith gives to our society something that liberalism has taken away. And that is a courage and a conviction that is rooted in the next world, which instills within us a courage in this world. Whereas liberalism says, well, it's all about this world, it's all about this life, and so we need to hold on to this life, its pleasures and its comforts, for as long as we can, and we don't want to endanger them. And it is that very materialistic, atheistic worldview that makes the liberals intimidated. I give you an example: Cosmic Skeptic. Do you know the YouTuber Cosmic Skeptic?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I know the man.
He briefly did an excursion into being a critic of Islam. And the moment the Islamists put the heat on him, he backed off. And now the chicken shit will only ever criticize Christianity. You know? And it's because he's frightened. He's frightened. And that coward, Cosmic Skeptic, and those cowards amongst the new atheist movement, the reason why they are such chicken shit cowards is because of their atheism. Whereas we Christians, we've been dealing with Islam for 1400 years. And they're still killing us, and we're still not frightened to evangelize amongst them. And we're still making converts. You know, the Islamic caliphates are dead, but the church founded by Jesus Christ is still here. The caliphate founded by Muhammad is gone. but the church founded by Jesus Christ is still here. So the question is, who are you going to back? Are you going to back liberal secular humanism, which is failing? Or are you going to back a new Christendom and pursue Christ, which will ultimately give us the victory? In the end, the church is going to win.
Bob, dude, credit where due. I can honestly say I don't know many people who could do what you do.
I do, because I meet them. But they're all Christians.
Sure. Yeah, no, I heard you say one time that it's actually a sin to be a coward. It's seen as a literal sin.
It is actually a sin, and it is to be a coward is a sin in the Christian faith. It's listed in the Book of Revelations, along with being a liar and a drunkard and witches and witchcraft, and being a coward is listed amongst those sins. And so, and Christians are told by our Lord that we should not fear men who can only destroy the body, but fear him who, having destroyed the body, can also cast the soul into the flames of Gehenna and destroy the soul. And so, as Christians, if you truly go deep into Christian spirituality, if you actually start building your life on Jesus's teachings, courage is something you have to cultivate as part of that understanding of the Christian faith. And cowardice is something that you have to remove from your heart as part of what it means to go deep into the teachings of the Christian faith. And this is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, is that we cultivate courage and we diminish cowardice within ourselves as individuals, but then also within society. So imagine if you had actual Christians running government, whether they could be intimidated by Islamic radicalism, like the liberal secular elites are intimidated by Islamic radicalism. Do you see the difference? And so, but then it spills out into other areas of your life. You start to be courageous in every aspect of your life. To be a saint is to live a life of courageous virtue. That is the definition of a saint. It's not just to have courage, but it's to have courage with virtue. But it's not just to have virtue, it's to have virtue with courage. And so as Christians, we're called to live a courageous and valiant life of virtue.
Well, the classic saying of how you do anything is how you do everything, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense. If it's kind of hard to say, but maybe because of the position you're in, you've got a better idea of this. But if we keep going down the road we're going, like, how do you see the future of the UK faring?
Well, I mean, I think the writing is already on the wall in the sense of you can see that literally everything about the UK is getting worse. There isn't any meter or measure of the life in the UK that's getting better right now. It's all getting worse. The economy, the life expectancy, the standard of living, job prospects, like the pension fund, like the NHS, the military, the police, the courts. Nothing is getting better. Everything is getting worse. And that is being accelerated by progressive liberalism, which operates a bit like a cancer within our society. It kills us from within. But the real thing that is driving the decay actually has got nothing to do, with Islam. It's to do with the liberals' abandonment of the Amatio Dei and the value of life, and the liberals' overemphasis of individualism over the family, and the understanding of the family as, the mother, the father, the children, and the extended bloodlines. When we abandon the family as the basic building block of society, which the debate amongst the elites was settled around the 1990s, when the Conservatives gave up on the family, or maybe even the 1980s, actually, with Margaret Thatcher. Actually, it probably goes back to Margaret Thatcher, so I take it back to the 1980s. when we gave up on that and we started killing our own children by the tens of thousands, we sealed our own fate, and the only way that we can reverse the decay of the West is that we return to the Christian faith in its commitment to the family as the building block of society, and the idea of, a pro-life culture that seeks to protect life from conception to natural death without any exceptions. And because it is the fact that we've stopped having children and we've stopped creating families that is killing us. No one is killing us. We are killing ourselves. No one is replacing us. We are taking ourselves off the stage, right? And it is done by our own commitment to liberal culture, right? All these people that talk about mass immigration, if you aren't willing, as part of that conversation, to come out against the abortion pill and against abortion, if you aren't willing to be pro-life, stop talking about mass immigration. If all these people that talk about the breakup of values, if you aren't willing to commit yourself to having a family and being committed to your family, then stop talking about the breakup of values, because those are at the heart. Those are the social doctrines that are leading to our decay. And so into this decay is stepping a more confident, vibrant Islamic community. But they're not the only group that's trying to step into that. Liberalism, particularly because of globalism, sweeps away national identities. And into that vacuum is seeking to step a younger Islamic community. That's normal. If you create a vacuum in a space, things are going to fill it. Why are we getting angry with Muslims for just doing what naturally happens anyway?
Yes,
we've done this to ourselves, and we need to accept personal responsibility. The result, and the church, funnily enough, because it is so. Ironically enough, the decay in Western society is actually more visible in the church. The average age of a Christian is in their 50s. The average age of everybody else is in their 40s, and the average age of the Muslim is in their 20s. That speaks for itself. But the reason, and so the church particularly needs to rediscover how to create families. The West needs to rediscover the importance of creating families, not just having kids, as some on the sort of atheistic conservative right are saying, right? It's not just about baby generation, it's about family generation and generations of families. Because it's in the family that your inheritance is passed on. It's in the family which is the vehicle of passing on your culture. So it's not about just having more kids, it's about actually having more families. And we need to rediscover the art of creating families, supporting families, and valuing families. And the church needs to learn that lesson faster than everyone else, because in the English-speaking world, the church is older than everyone else. And that's quite a damning indictment of so-called Christian leadership.
Bob, yes, nailed it. You're completely right. I think everyone is very quick to point fingers at Islam, but it's the same old. They haven't changed what they've been doing. They're just, it is what it is.
Yeah, we'll just keep doing the same thing and expect different results.
Right. It's insanity, right?
Yeah.
It's, and yeah, one thing that surely no one should be able to deny, because you can plot the demographics so easily. It's this idea of not having kids. And like you say, realistically, if you are going to have kids, the healthiest way to do that is within the family unit. It's one of these things where it's so alarmingly obvious, and yet still there's it seems not enough people are really talking about this. Would it be fair to say
that with Christianity, Jesus is the best example, and then with the Quran, it would be Muhammad.
Yes.
What are some of the main differences between the two?
I mean, yeah, I mean they're massively different, both in what they teach about themselves and in also their practice as well. But I would say one of the fundamental axioms of their different approaches is that Christ works from the bottom up. Muhammad ends up working from the top down. So Christ works from being an example, and he seeks to establish his kingdom through love and the power of the Holy Spirit, and he forms that community around what could be summarized with the Beatitudes, to build peace, to pursue righteousness, to love justice, to pursue mercy, um, um, and to practice humility, and then to pursue good works in which we love our neighbor, our families, our brethren, and our enemies. Whereas
And he
in Islam,
leads by example, right?
yeah, he leads by example. Well, so does Muhammad. Muhammad very much leads by example, but for Muhammad, it's very much about the imposition of the dominance of the Muslim community over others, and the kind of superiority and the practices of an apartheid system that come from that. So when you look at Muhammad's life, for instance, he allowed his followers to and arguably himself. He practiced the slave trade and permitted his followers to practice the slave trade. He married a child and had sex with a child. He participated certainly in stuff that looks racist. So for example, in Islamic Sharia, I don't know if you know this, but it's actually discouraged for any Muslim who's not an Arab to marry an Arab Muslim, which is inherently racist. But people don't know about that stuff, but it's there in Islamic teaching. Yeah, it's basic Arab supremacism. People don't know about that, but it's in the book, The Reliance of the Traveller, which is a Shafi book of Islamic fiqh. I've got it. I could show you if you wanted me to. But and then Muhammad also commanded his followers to conquer and to fight non-Muslims until they become Muslim, or until they accept a lower status as a dhimmi and pay the jizya tax. Whereas Jesus sort of inverts that logic. Jesus wants us to conquer the world, but he wants us to conquer the world through love and good works. Whereas Muhammad wants his followers to conquer the world, and he wants to conquer it through violence and oppression. And I think this is so Christians are very much about conquering the world. We really are serious about conquering the world. But our chief means are to conquer the world through convincing you with arguments and through winning your heart, through demonstrating the love of God and winning people's souls. Whereas in Islam, because of Muhammad's example, you end up having this structure of dominance that's imposed by force. And there are clear injustices within Islam that you don't get within Christ. So, for example, Christ lived in a time when everyone could own slaves, but he never owned a slave himself. And his inspiration led to a commitment by Christians to oppose the slavery that you can see right through 2,000 years of history. Christians have abolished the slave trade on more than one occasion. You know, everybody knows about William Wilberforce, but do they know about William the Conqueror? You know, do they know about Louis IX? Do they know about the abolition of slavery in the 5th century in the Roman Empire? That, you know, like, Christians have abolished the slave trade on multiple occasions, whereas Islam has maintained the slave trade for 1400 years. Christians are fighting to end the slave trade. Muslims who are committed to their faith are fighting to maintain the slave trade. That should tell you everything that you need to know about the difference between Muhammad and Jesus.
What's interesting is, certainly from maybe a Western perspective, I think everyone acknowledges that slavery is terrible. And especially when you're doing these debates, do you get a lot of pushback on slavery from the Muslims?
Yes, absolutely. And the reason why people in the West are convinced that slavery is terrible is because of the influence of the Christian faith. It's the Christian faith that taught you that slavery is a bad thing. You know, whereas when I debate Muslims on this topic, they invariably try to justify the slave trade consistently. You know, and the reason for that is that the taking of slaves is intrinsically connected to jihad. And so jihad is intrinsically connected to Islam. And so whilst ever there's jihad, you're going to have slaves. You know, Muslims can never abandon jihad, so they can never abandon slave tradery. And so that's why for 1400 years, Christians, in the same 1400 years, Christians have been fighting against the slave trade, and Muslims have been fighting for the slave trade. And that is a debate that's still going on. It's still happening. I can go to the Muslim world and buy a black child as a slave. Legally. I can't do that anywhere in the world that's been influenced by Christianity. I can buy people as slaves in the world influenced by Christianity, but I can't do it legally. It's an illicit trade. But in the Islamic world, it's an explicit trade that is legal and is still being practiced. And all of those black folk that have converted to Islam because of some narratives around slavery, you need to reassess your decisions. And you need to think whether actually you've been duped by a con man. You know, Muhammad Ali was duped by a con man. He used to be called Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay was a white Christian who fought against the slave trade. Muhammad and Ali were two Muslims who practiced the slave trade of black people. Cassius Clay fought against the slave trade of black people. Muhammad Ali was duped. And so are a lot of people duped. Because the thing about the Dawagandists is that they're like the ultimate con artist, car salesman. They literally will just tell you anything to get the sale, regardless of whether that's actually true or not to their religion, or true or not in their to your religion when they're criticizing your religion. And Dawagandists are notorious for telling outright lies.
But I suppose if Muhammad has slaves itself, then there's no denying it.
Yeah, well, that's the point. That's why Muslims don't deny it. When you press them, when you press into them, they don't deny the rightness of the slave trade. They accept it. Wow. But then they come out with some waffling nonsense that the point is that Islam is aimed at abolishing slavery over time. Well, I'm sorry, but we've managed to abolish it ahead of Islam, so clearly it's not working. You know, if we've managed to abolish it, then you've got no excuse. We didn't need Islam to abolish the slave trade. We did it because of Christ's example. So clearly, Sharia law has failed, and Christian teaching has succeeded when Muslims make the argument that Islam is leading to the abolishment of slavery, which is the kind of apologetical argument that they often use.
Actually, one of and you've touched on this slightly, but one of your clips, one of the first ones I saw of you, was someone confronted you about the Crusades, saying how they were unjust and they shouldn't have been done. Could you explain a little bit about that history?
So Islam emerged from the Arabian Peninsula in 632 onwards, and it invaded Christian lands. And it invaded Christian lands all across the Middle East, North Africa, East, the Anatolia, and Hispania, and the sort of Iberian Peninsula, and southern France, Sicily, Italy, Greece, and was busy conquering and persecuting, enslaving and pillaging and desecrating Christian places of worship, and reducing Christians to second-class citizens. That continued from the 7th century right up to the 11th century. And in the 11th century, Christians in the West organized their own fight back. Like the Crusades, what was different, like it wasn't that Christians weren't fighting before. I mean, the Byzantine Empire was fighting from the 7th century onwards, and the Frankish, and the sort of Dark Age kingdoms in Spain were fighting, and the Berber Christians were fighting from the 7th century. What happens in the 11th century is that the church goes, you know what, this is a fight that concerns us all. We're going to organize across the entire church to respond to this continued Islamic aggression. And that's when the Crusades start. And so, so the church manages to get all of Christendom involved in the fight to help actually persecuted Christians in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. And it had already started organizing Christians to fight in Spain. But the point that's really important that everybody needs to get is that this is a response to Islamic aggression. Like, Muslims had invaded Christian lands, were attacking Christian populations. The Crusades were not an act of aggression. They were a response to Islamic aggression, and so for the whole period, the whole 200-year period that the Crusades, the official historical Crusades are carried out, they are a response to 7 centuries of continuous Islamic aggression. And the Crusader spirit didn't die at the end of that 200-year period. Like, you got the Holy Alliances that were formed by the Pope, to fight against radicals and against the Ottoman Empire and so on. And so you have Christian resistance for the whole period of 1400 years, but it's always a response to Islamic aggression. And so, I think that the Crusades were completely justified. And I'm not one of these people that look into that period of history and go, that was wrong. I think they were justified, and I think that they were completely valid.
Yes, yeah. Well, and maybe this shows how my image of Christ has been skewed a little bit. But, it'd be fair to say that to Christians, Jesus is the perfect example of how to live, right?
Yeah.
And in my head, I thought, like, this isn't something which Jesus would justify, the Crusades, like any aggression or all the rest of it. But the Crusades, presumably then, from what you've been saying, the Crusades align with Jesus as well.
Well, the thing is, there's no explicit teaching in the Christian faith to use violence. And that's because violence in the Christian worldview sits at the very edge of what's permissible, and it only becomes permissible when the Overton window shifts to such a degree that it's the last resort, and we don't have other options. Christians using violence can't come from a place of hatred, which is often where violence comes from.
Sure.
Christians using violence has to come from a place of love. And so that means that we can't be motivated to be violent because we hate the person we're being violent to, but because we love someone else. So in other words, to put it in a concrete example that I'm sure you can appreciate, if you were to walk home to your mother's and you were walking up to the front door and you found that it had been broken in, and then you sort of rushed in because you thought somebody had burgled your home, but then you hear your mum crying and sort of crying out for help upstairs, and then you ran upstairs and you found someone trying to rape your mother, I'm sure you would understand that you would use violence because you love your mother. I mean, the rapist you've never seen before. Your instinct to use violence to defend your mother doesn't come from this hatred that you have towards this person, because you've never met them before. You're, as far as you, for all you know, they could be mentally ill, like severely mentally ill, like. But you would still use violence because you're trying to protect your mum. And so, within the Christian worldview, Christ exemplifies this when he goes into the temple, and for zeal of the house of God, he fashions a whip and uses it to drive out those that are desecrating the temple. And the apostles remember that he will be filled with zeal for the house of the Lord. And so as Christians, the house of the Lord for us is the church. It is the people of God. That is where the tabernacle of the Lord is, and that the Holy Spirit dwells. And so to defend persecuted Christians, it is in extreme circumstances acceptable to use violence. And that's why the Crusades, it doesn't justify everything that happened in the Crusades, and it doesn't justify every crusade. But the basic premise of the Crusades is justified according to Christian teaching.
Okay, I've got one more question then.
Go on then.
Okay, I've seen a lot of videos on this recently, how people are saying we're in the last 50 years to be alive, and there's a lot of prophecies which seem to be coming true. Is this something that you've seen? Is this something that you agree with, maybe?
No, never heard of it, and I'm immediately skeptical. Who are these people that saying that we got like 50 years to be alive? I mean, who are these
as
prophets?
In the prophecies of Jesus' second coming. And
no, brother. Oh gosh, no. Anyone who tries to say that they know when Jesus is coming back is immediately disqualified from being a voice to listen to. Our Lord himself said, because of his own incarnation, that no one knoweth the day nor the hour, not the angels nor the Son, but the Father only. And that was due to his incarnation, meaning that he didn't have access to his human mind did not have access to the full divine knowledge that he possessed. But if Jesus as a fully human being was not permitted to know, then absolutely no one else does. And so anyone who claims that they can give you a timescale as to when Jesus is coming back should be immediately labeled a charlatan. Immediately label them a charlatan and stop listening to them. No one knows. No one can know. Because as part of his own incarnation, Christ denied his own human mind access to that knowledge that he possessed. So, it's not for anyone else to know. And so, yeah, that's utter rubbish. Utter rubbish. I don't know when our Lord returns. It might be tomorrow. You might have only got a day left. It could be in 50,000 years, in which case humanity's got nothing to worry about. It does have things to worry about, but it's not that. Like, the point is, we don't know. The point is when you look at Jesus' teaching, is we have to be ready. We've got to be ready for Christ's return. And as Christians, we have this concept of nepsis, of always being prepared, preparing ourselves for the coming of the Lord. The status of the Christian is to be on alert, to be ready, to put it in military terms, to stand to, to be on our guard, to be prepared. Like that is the normative state of the Christian being. And the reason for that is we do not know when our Lord returns. We just have to be ready for when he does.
Wow. Bob, you honestly, thank you so much. This has been very educational for me, and it's great to talk to someone who has so much knowledge on the subject.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope it's a blessing to you, brother. And, I don't know if you have a Bible, but I want to encourage you to get one and to start reading it, and, to get back in touch with me if you've got any questions. It's been lovely talking to you. I thought you asked some very good questions, and thank you for letting me come on to your show.
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed our show. As you can see, our content can be a tad controversial at times. Because of that, the algorithm really doesn't like us. The good news is that's where you can. If you like us and you want to support us, the easiest ways are to like, comment, and subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us here at BluntClarity. On top of that, we've made a list of some of our favorite videos, which you can find right here. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Enjoy.